Hi, I'm Seo, and I want to take you on an adventure into one of the infinite dimensions, walled off yet connected by the warp. In this dimension, events that would be familiar to us are changed in the slightest ways, cascading out of control, yet ultimately leading to a horrifying event known as the Angel Apostasy. We will be going over what will happen to one of the Emperor's most stalwart sons, the Gorgon, the Medusan Stallion, the Manus, the myth, the beheaded legend, Ferrus Manus. For the sake of the two people who watch and don't know who he is or what he's about, I'll take the Stan Lee method and give you a quick rundown. He grew up in the terrible world of Medusa, where despite the amount of monsters, there are strong, hardy human clans who survive this living hell. Presumably the monsters are there due to its proximity to the Eye of Terror, this giant rift in space-time, which a lot of psychic energies and gnarly stuff comes out of, where your living nightmares made manifest, all that fun stuff. There, he beats off a lot of monsters, but the one of note is a worm, or rim, some dragon snake worm thing, and he only kills it in the most jock way a Primarch can, by giving it a swirly in a pool of lava until it stops flinching. Unfortunately, only for the metal to melt off and coat his arms and nerd for the rest of his life. Which, surprisingly, is not nearly as long as he'd like. Spoilers, he gets his head lobbed off by his polar opposite and best friend Fulgrim. Now he's a force ghost tormenting nerds until his father can get off his lazy boy and build him a new body. Now that's the short of it. Also, final aside, if by the end of this you end up enjoying it, please give me a like and subscribe. Number go up, make me brain feel good. In many ways he's a Manus after my own heart. He's a hulking brute with a creative streak, who often greets his brothers with a,
"Hey, face, good to see you. Shut up, I'm working. Your gift's on the table. Do you like it? I don't care. Now off."
It's been a minute since I've read it, but I'm pretty sure that's word for word his interaction with Lorgar. By God, I just love that about him. I love the Bants as much as the next guy and enjoy that abrasive attitude. Quite frankly, I'd talk to every artist I could on Twitter like that, but they usually ends up in, a block. Let's go back to what I said before, that Fulgrim is not just his best friend, but his total opposite. And I don't mean just by looking at him. I mean, as unintentional as it might be, looking back, Ferrus's story mirrors Fulgrim's. I said, "Wait, Seo," I hear you cajunly reply. "That's a terrible idea. Whole Fulgrim's story's awful. He's a great loyalist leading his legion to be the best, until a swinging plot device arbitrarily makes him comically evil against his will. Why would you be willing to do that to our good boy Ferrus, our little best boy Ferrus?" Good question. It's not hard to see why it sucks so bad. The Lair Blade, named after a bunch of Naga-looking Slanesh-worshipping hedonists known as the Lair, totally did a 180 on his characterization. Before the Blade, he was very much like Sanguinius, in that he was thoughtful and actively cared for the common, regular mortal humans. And after, his descent into evil was as rapid as it was boring. Now, I won't claim to be the most well-read YouTube channel around. I've read like 15 to 20 of the 40k books and realized I wanted to write, so I diversified my book diet. Can you really blame me? Well, moving off of Fulgrim, let's look at Ferrus. What if there was something which was always with Ferrus? Something which represented the virtues he and his sons valued most. Those virtues, when taken to their extremes, become vices and consume him and eventually his whole legion, figuratively and literally. I'm talking about his very own iron hands. They symbolize his virtues, strength, endurance, and his hatred for weakness. Now, I understand hatred gets a bad rap these days. Hate, when directed appropriately, however, is good. It's good to hate abusers. It's good to hate the unjust. It's good to hate those who prey upon the weak and vulnerable. And in this sense, in moderation, it's very good to hate weakness. Just a quick aside, obviously this is not referring to physical weakness. Someone with cerebral palsy can be strong even though their body doesn't move as they wish. Strength of mind and will is just as valuable as strength of body. If you disagree, agree in the comments. His hands, flexible and strong, everything an Astartes needed to be. It's perfectly representative of his core contradiction, his hypocrisy. They are coated out of living metal, necrodermis, from a Xenos, from a Necron, alien beings antithetical to his father's dream. In the story Wrath of Iron, we see some insight into Ferrus's head, that after the Great Crusade is over and he no longer needs them, he plans on getting rid of his arms as they become a crutch. He also plans to turn his sons away from their ideals that the flesh is weak. Now remember, Ferrus abhors weakness, and by extension so do his sons, and he wants them to embrace their humanity wholly, which, is admirable. These feelings and motivations, this characterization where he's ironically leaning on this crutch of his arms, the lack of faith in his flesh and its abilities, the weakness at the core of himself and his legion will doom them both. Finally, 5 minutes in, let's get to the core idea here, and my idea is very simple. The Necron construct being what have you, that Ferrus killed a Medusa did not fully die. Maybe the worm was not fully of Necron origin, but was just a monster on the planet that a separate experimental War in Heaven Necron weapon attached itself to and took over, similar to a Venom symbiote. Or, if the creature did die, turned into a pool or whatever, and grew on his arms, at some point in the future, he touches an active Necron artifact and his arms react to it. And then whatever the initial cause was, doesn't matter. All that doesn't matter. The result is the same. Slowly, microscopically, held back by his demigod-like immune system, but slowly nonetheless, it grows. Over time, Ferrus realizes what's happening, but by then it's too late. He already relies on them. He relies on their strength instead of his own. From this insecurity, and to make sure no one else can notice the encroaching necrodermis, like a fat kid wearing a shirt in the pool, he makes a point to always stay armored, only showing his face and his iron hands. I know right now you're all coming to the same realization that I have, and what this really means long term. No beach episode. No Ferrus Sama running around hitting beach balls in a swimsuit. Not with that skin condition. Now I say I won't go too much into Fulgrim's character. I'll save that for another video. But suffice it to say, his relationship with Ferrus is just as strong in this timeline, if not more so. He sees the strength without and within. But this mad perfectionist noticed a slight flaw in the way he speaks, in the hesitation that only a Primarch, only the most perceptive Primarch, only something his best friend could pick up on. Something is wrong. But pride and overwhelming hatred for weakness, virtue to vice, prevents him from confiding in his closest friend. There is a chance it becomes too much. Ferrus is a man of action, and once it sufficiently crawls up his arm, he does what he needs to. But it's too late. Specialized tools of his design meant to burrow in his flesh and separate meat from metal don't work. It's almost as if the necrodermis has its own immune system and disrupts the tools, only causing the infection to spread faster. Now, I'm not too certain about this next part. One path I could see is him taking a drastic move, using another tool of his design, obviously, to cut off his own arm and stop the growth. It doesn't work. It has entered his blood, and at the stump, like a mold, it reforms. Slowly enough, sure, but it begins to reform and eventually takes the shape of his arm again. If down this path, he stores his first cut-off arm, and his legion gets to it later. That, or he endures this, considering it a weakness that he can will out, trusting in himself and his ability to think of something before it's too late. Once it begins to crawl up his neck, he never takes off his helm again. His normally already caloric temperament takes a turn downward due to his time running out. His consideration for what is weakness broadens, and this causes a rift between himself, his legion, and all the other legions. His sons follow in the footstep of their father and move further and further into a zealous, almost religious hatred of their own flesh. They have become snobbish and extremists, only finding support in the most radical of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Oh, their civilian casualty rate becomes nearly almost unacceptably high, with at best a callousness for normal human lives to at worst sheer disdain for those that they're ostensibly fighting for. This is all happening within the context of a greater swirling prelude to the apostasy, and Fulgrim boards Ferrus' ship to confront him. Maybe it's for a bunch of civilians being murdered, maybe it's for cyclonically torpedoing a planet for having weak leadership, maybe it's because he was just in the sector because he missed his friend and wanted to see him. Maybe it's to confront him to see why he's being so distant, maybe it's Maybelline, who knows. Fulgrim gets to the exterior of Ferrus' chamber, as he's another Primarch, and if Ferrus' sons didn't get an explicit no from Daddy to not let Ferrus on board, who's going to tell Fulgrim no, really? Anyway, he gets there, but the doors are locked tight. He uses all of his techno-trickery and all the wisdom he's gained over the years, but nothing seems to open them up. Until a good memory floods in his head of him and Ferrus, and he uses that plus some cipher or something that Ferrus liked as for the encryption to get in. Locking the door behind him, he slowly walks into his spare inner chambers. When he hears something further, he calls out to his brother. What he hears back is terrifying, and it causes him to run. There he is, Ferrus, standing naked in the center of the room, illuminated by shop lights overhead, because that's how Ferrus likes to live, because he's a weirdo. The necrodermis is spread over almost his entire body, leaving only half his mouth and one eye untouched. What scared Fulgrim, and let me make this very clear, I mean fear as in worry, was something in Ferrus's voice. Now, it wasn't so low or unbecoming of one of their own Primarchs as fear, nor was it the lack of fierce defiance which came out from every word that escaped Ferrus's lips. It was concern. Concern for his sons aboard his ship and the state that he would leave them in. Concern for the people he had hurt in his obsession. Concern for his closest friend, who now sees him at his lowest. Eyes lock in the last moment, a final spark of defiance roars out.
Do what must be done, brother.
Reaching critical mass, it moves at a speed a mortal eye can witness. The moment when it's all over, his entire body becomes coated in necrodermis, and for a moment leaves him frozen, immobile, as if he were turned to a metallic stone statue. That is before the change begins to occur. As his skin ripples, Fulgrim's sword is unleashed. With 2 hands, he swings in a wide arc, and he takes the blade to Ferrus's neck. But the blade is stopped in a mound of necrodermis. Even with Fulgrim's might, his tugs don't move the blade. To his horror, the necrodermis begins to expand upon the sword. Letting go of the sword, Fulgrim considers his options. An immediate explosion in the room, blowing up the ship from within. Nothing's good enough. Okay, he's going to take the ship down from without. He leaves and contacts his ship. He warns Ferrus' first-in-command and tells them to evacuate the ship. He's prepping his flagships as they speak. Understanding the context, the leadership of Ferrus' flagship assure Fulgrim that they will evacuate immediately and that he should go and prep his ships. But they're too far gone. They will not see their father die, especially if he's been graced with a blessing from the Omnissiah. So, as he leaves their ship, their fleet open fires on Fulgrim's, specifically trying to take out Fulgrim's ship-to-ship transport. Though, through his swift maneuvering, he barely survives, the Iron Fists escape. This far, he's begun to metamorphose into something far more corrupted. Is it pure Xenos taint, a rogue Necrontyr weapon? Is it part of a Satan, or something in between with an abominable intelligence? The answer lies somewhere in the warp. Anyway, Ferrus is a fun character, but my personal experience with the Iron Hands is learning about them early on into discovering 40k, assuming they were going to be some big deal since they're like this with the Mechanicus, and not really being drawn to them. And unfortunately, over time, finding out that they're just kind of there, suffering and forgotten alone. Well, at least forgotten by GW, as far as I'm aware. Now his sons get meh attention in terms of books and models. It's funny how good old Manus in real life is treated inversely to how Perturabo is in the lore. He gets a great title, one of Gilliman's dauntless few and the Lord of Iron. Starts off pretty optimistic, him being a loyalist most connected to the tech faction, Perturabo being super on board with the Emperor's vision, quickly gets a high status position that ends up being a curse. First of the 2 main characters' deaths in the heresy, and gets given the toughest battles for the honor, that being Perturabo, and then is subsequently ignored until something big needs to happen. Ferrus is ghosts for warp shenanigans, and Pert effectively running the heresy. Regardless of how Ferrus is treated in real life, this was really fun to write. Thank you all for
Big McThankies from McSpankies.
encouraging me into producing my follies. I have a decent amount of stuff written down that's not produced or released, like 30 pages of little seeds and notes for the Angel Apostasy, and some original works of mine like Beetle and Dragon and Freaks that are written down and fully completed stories. But either way, I very much appreciate all of your comments. I read each and every one, and they make me smile and my heart soar a little bit. I know it's cliche, but I love seeing all of, everything you have to say about the nonsense, good or bad. Some of you have corrected some of my ideas or been like, hey, dum-dum, you forgot this, which I love. Either way, thank you. See ya.